Good morning. We're learning Mariam Bas Kalman Reuven and Hashem Aliyah. We are at the top of Ayin Tes Amud Beis. Okay, a bit of an involved discussion about the different types of materials that a person is able to write different holy items. So there are 3 items that we're going to be talking about and 3 different types of parchments we're going to talk about. We're going to be talking about mezuzahs, we're going to talk about tefillin, and we're going to talk about Sifrei Torah, and the different things that they could be written on. We're also going to be talking about 3 different types of parchment. So there is something gvil. Basically, when an animal is killed or dies, you could skin the animal and you could take off the skin. The skin is called gvil. Gvil is the entirety of the skin, and then if you start to separate the skin one from the other, you have something called klaf. Klaf comes from the word. Anyone know what word klaf comes from? Klipa. Klipa means like a shell, but also it typically means not like a klipa. Sometimes can be used for a hard shell, but typically a klipa is like a very in halacha. Sometimes you have a term that's used kedei klipa. Klipa is basically just like a peel, like a very thin amount. So klipa is basically, you have the gvil is like the thick skin, and then klipa or klaf is when you peel off the outer layer, very thin layer. That's called klaf. Klaf is like a very, very thin layer, and then there's something else which is duchsustus. Duchsustus is like the lower part of it, which is a little bit thicker. Okay, so there's basically gvil, which is like everything together, and then there's duchsustus, and there is klaf. Klaf is what the term I think we're most familiar with, which is what most things are written on. But there's going to be a big discussion about what is allowed to be written on what. Sefer Torah, mezuzah, tefillin. As we'll see, it's not so clear what things should be written on based on some different opinions over here, and that's what we're going to be getting into and ultimately conclude with figuring out what could be written on what. But the Gemara begins by quoting our Mishnah. The Mishnah told us that if a person takes out klaf, which we're going to translate as parchment, but again, it's the thin amount, the thin part of the skin. If a person takes out parchment, kedei lichtov alav parsha katana, enough to write a small passage of tefillin on it, which the Mishnah told us is which passage, which is sort of shortest passage in the tefillin, is Shema. Exactly, is Shema. Now, when it says Shema, it doesn't just mean Shema Yisrael, Shema Elokeinu, Shema Echad. It means Shema, and which is connected to Ve'ahavta. Okay, so that passage, so it has to be parchment, which is, I don't know, yay big or something, depends on the size of the sofer, but it's a small amount, which you could write Shema and Ve'ahavta. That's the smallest passage of tefillin that's on it. Now, before we go further, just to remind ourselves, in the mezuzah, what's written on the mezuzah? It's that first passage and the second passage, Shema, Ve'ahavta, and Ve'hayim Shemoah. That's what's written on a parchment of tefillin, of mezuzah, and that's what's going to get into some challenges over here. So let's see. So again, the Mishnah says, Klaf kedei lichtov ala parsha katana. A person takes out parchment enough to write the smallest passage of tefillin on it, which is Shema and Ve'ahavta. Uraminu. However, we have a brisa which would pose the following question, because the brisa says, Klaf uduchsustus, if a person carries parchment or duchsustus, kedei lichtov ala mezuzah, enough to write a mezuzah. Now, mezuzah, as we just pointed out, is much larger. Mezuzah is not the text written on mezuzah is Ve'ahavta and V'hayim Shemoah. So which one is it? On the one hand, you're telling me klaf, if you take out klaf, it's enough to write the first paragraph, Shema and Ve'ahavta, and now you're saying it's Ve'ahavta and V'hayim Shemoah. So which one is it? So the Gemara says, my mezuzah shabbat tefillin. When it says that to write the small portion of the mezuzah, it doesn't mean a mezuzah, what we typically call a mezuzah, but rather mezuzah shabbat tefillin. Mezuzah really means like a scroll, could mean a scroll, and what it means is a scroll inside the tefillin. Okay, so basically we're saying the word mezuzah over here is lav dafka. It's not literal that when we think mezuzah means like the mezuzah on the side of our door. Rather, when it says mezuzah over here, it means the mezuzah in the tefillin, which would mean the passage of Shema and Ve'ahavta. That's the easy way to reconcile this contradiction, by saying that when it says mezuzah, it doesn't mean mezuzah, rather means tefillin, and then you have no contradiction. It's a funny term. And the guys ask the Gemara, V'kar lehu l'tefillin mezuzah, would the Tana really call a parchment of tefillin a mezuzah? The Gemara says, yes. As we'll see places where it's going to be clear that the Tanaim refer to the parchment in the tefillin as a mezuzah. Vatanya was taught in the following brisa. Okay, so there are if you recall all the way back, we passed the midway points. Just want to observe, we passed the midway points. I think I gave a shout out to that a little bit earlier, but now we really passed the midway points. But if you recall all the way back from the beginning of the section, probably one of our early hard sections was the section of Tumah and Tara, touching certain holy things. It talked about it. If you touch certain holy things, your hands become tamei in regards to truma. If you recall that, great. Yeah, ring some bells, faint bells. Great, there you go. Look at that. Okay, okay. So the Gemara says, so not only the Gemara now discusses, the Brisa now goes into more detail about that discussion. Not only touching holy scrolls, but discusses touching tefillin. And the question is, where on the tefillin, which part of the tefillin do you touch in order to become tamei? So it begins by saying, Ritzuas tefillin imat tefillin. That touching not only tefillin itself, but even touching the straps of tefillin, mitamas asedaim, would make a person's hands tamei in regards to truma. Bifnei atzman. However, if the straps are by themselves and they're not attached, then it doesn't cause a person's hands to become tamei. It's only when you touch the straps, when they're attached to the tefillin, that's when they become tamei. However, Rav Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Rav Shimon, Hanogea b'Ritzua tahar, he disagrees. He says if you touch the straps of tefillin, your hands are still tamei. Achiyiga b'ktzitza, until you touch the actual leather boxes of the tefillin, the boxes of the tefillin. Okay. Rabbi Zakkai Mishmo Omer Tahar achiyiga b'mezuzah atzma. Rav Zakkai says no. Touching the straps, you're tahar. Touching the boxes, you are tahar. Touching the mezuzah, you're tamei. Now, what does mezuzah mean in this context? The mezuzah on the door? Of course not. We're clearly talking about tefillin, and we see Ben Zakkai refers to, or Rabbi Zakkai refers to tefillin, the scroll of tefillin, as mezuzah. Okay, so you see very clearly that mezuzah could be a term for tefillin, and again, at this point, the Gemara is trying to answer that when the Brisa said. There's no contradiction because both in our Mishnah it said that the parchment, it's enough to write the small parsha of tefillin on it, and the Brisa which said klaf is also when it says mezuzah it refers to tefillin. Okay, ask the Gemara about Mitani Seifa klaf kedei lichtav alav parsha ketana shebetefillin shishma Yisrael. That Brisa which we started off with the question, that Brisa continued and said by klaf as long as you can write the small portion which is Shema Yisrael. Okay, which the small portion, the smallest portion of the tefillin, which is Shema Yisrael. Okay, so there it says explicitly, meaning the first part of the Brisa is the one we quoted earlier, which said klaf kedei lichtav lamezuzah, klaf v'duchsustavs kedei lichtav lamezuzah, and then the second part of the Brisa now says klaf kedei lichtav laparshak danish b'tefillin shishma Yisrael. So there it says explicitly that by the klaf it's enough to write the small passage of tefillin on it, which is Shema Yisrael. Miklal dereisha b'mezuzah maskinan. If the second part is specifically talking about the mezuzah, right, then that means the first part is, the second part is explicitly talking about the small portion of tefillin. That means that the word mezuzah above cannot mean tefillin because here in that same Brisa it explicitly says small portion, small passage of tefillin, right? In other words, again, the Brisa initially, it can mean the same thing. In other words, yes, it's true. It's sometimes mezuzah means tefillin, granted. But over here in the same Brisa, it says mezuzah, and then it says tefillin explicitly. So don't tell me the first part's talking about tefillin because it says tefillin explicitly later. It must mean the first part means mezuzah mamish, which means mezuzah meaning the section of mezuzah, the portion, the passage which is written on mezuzah, which is Shema and V'hayim Shemoah. Right? So you're right. So the Gemara says, good question. Now we have to reinterpret the Brisa. Hachikitani. This is what the Brisa means. Klafich v'duchstustus shi'uram bekama. Okay, so you have parchment and you have duchstustus. Sorry, it's a hard word. So what's the minimum measurement for them? So then it goes into detail. Duchstustus kidei lichtav lamezuzah. So if you take out duchstustus, which is the thicker part of parchment, then that's enough to write a mezuzah on it. Klaf kidei lichtav laparshak danish b'tefillin shishma Yisrael. But when it comes to klaf, then yes, it's the smaller portion of the tefillin, i.e. just Shema, and then again you have no contradiction. So the way we're reading the Brisa now is saying that the Brisa reads, Duchsustus, there you have to write, there it's something you use for tefillin, and therefore you would write both Shema and V'hayim Shemoah. Duchsustus, you enough to write a mezuzah, you would write the portion of mezuzah on it, okay, which is Shema and V'hayim Shemoah, and klaf to write the small you use for tefillin, and therefore all you have to write is Shema Yisrael. Okay, so what the Brisa basically seems to imply over here in its conclusion, the way we're learning it now, and we're going to stick to this, is that duchsustus is used for mezuzah, i.e. Shema and V'hayim Shemoah. Klaf is used for tefillin, and that's why the amount that you take out would be just enough to write, bless you, just enough to write for one of the small portions of your tefillin, which is just the portion of Shema and Ve'ahavta. Yeah? Make sense? Okay. 79b2. Amarav. Okay, top of the page. Okay, so we're going to have a question from the statement of Rav. Duchsustus harihu keklaf. The Rav says duchsustus is the same as parchment. It's a little bit of a cryptic statement, and the Gemara is going to go through a whole analysis based on what we think he means. Okay, so Rav says duchsustus, which again is the thicker part of the parchment, is the same as klaf, which is that thin part of the parchment. Okay, so ma klaf. Now the Gemara, this is the Gemara's interpretation of what Rav said. Ma klaf kosman of tefillin. After sustus kosim love tefillin. Just like by klaf, just like by that thin part of the parchment, you write tefillin on it. So too by duchsustus, you write tefillin on it. Okay? So now at this point, we're assuming that both on klaf and duchsustus, you could write tefillin on it, and it's going to bring us to a question. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, klaf k'dei lichtav lo parshik tanash b'tefillin. When it comes to parchment, just klaf, the amount that you could take out on Shabbos in order to be chayav is enough to write the small passage of tefillin on it. Shema Yisrael, which is a passage of Shema, meaning Shema and Ve'ahavta. So the implication would be, as it says in the parentheses, that for duchsustus, you would have to take out a larger portion, right? Which implies that duchsustus is not used for tefillin, right? Understood? In other words, again, so the Brisa says that when it comes to klaf, it's just enough to write the smallest portion, which is the portion of tefillin on it. Implication that when it comes to duchsustus, it would be the larger amount which you'd use for mezuzah. Again, let's just review. Shema, you have portions of in a person's tefillin, they have different scrolls. One of the scrolls is just the passage of Shema and Ve'ahavta. In our mezuzahs, it's Ve'ahavta, Shema Ve'ahavta, and V'haim Shema, right? So when the Mishnah told us that when you take out klaf, okay, which is one type of skin, one type of parchment, it's just enough to write Shema Ve'ahavta, implying that the other types of hides, which is duchsustus, you'd have to write the larger amounts, which is Shema and Shema Ve'ahavta and V'haim Shemoah. Now Rav said that duchsustus is like klaf, implying, as the Gemara understood, that you could write tefillin on duchsustus. So if you could write tefillin on duchsustus, then why do you need to take out a larger portion for duchsustus? You should be able to take the smaller portion because you're able to write tefillin on the smaller. You're able to write tefillin on duchsustus. So why is it saying that you could only write that only for klaf if you could write the small amounts, implying that duchsustus you can't write tefillin on? Rav told us you could write tefillin on duchsustus, so you should be chayav for taking out even the smaller amount. Yeah.
I don't see what the inference is being made to say he only mentions, cloth and not duchsustus. But if we already said before, according to Rav, that you can write on both, and he doesn't have to specify both because they're viewed as one and the same.
Well, the Mishnah, meaning Rav's coming along telling us, the Mishnah should have spelled out which one. Like we're talking about different things over here. Once we're talking about something to write Shema on, then why not write all of them? You should write all the things you could write on. The Gemara sort of gives the answer. The Gemara says, not entirely. The Gemara says lemitzvah. Lemitzvah means like this, the mitzvah in this context means the ideal. And what that means is that he's saying that really the ideal is klaf should be used for tefillin, okay, and not duchsustus. Tefillin, again, is the very thin klipa. It's the very thin type of parchment. That's the ideal that you should use for tefillin. Technically, you could use duchsustus. But since only technically duchsustus is okay, therefore, when it comes to carrying, you would carry. You'd only be liable for using duchsustus for what it's normally used for, i.e., mezuzahs, and not for tefillin. Right? So basically, which is interesting halacha coming out of this. Basically, we're saying that since duchsustus could technically be used for tefillin, but since it's not usually used for that, therefore, when it comes to the minimal amount, you would only be chayav if you carry it out for something which is typically used for, which we saw earlier, right? Shchiach and not shchiach, typically used for which is mezuzah, but technically it could be used for tefillin as well. Okay? Ask the Gemara another question. Tashma, halach l'mosh misinai. We have, when we say halach l'mosh misinai, that means we have an oral tradition all the way back to Har Sinai, to Moshe, which means not written anywhere in the Torah, but we do have a tradition. In other words, there's no textual support for this, but there is it's a tradition going all the way back to Moshe, that what? Tefillin ala klaf, umezuzah al duchsustus. Here it says explicitly that tefillin should be written on parchment and mezuzahs are written on duchsustus. So, and then it continues, it says klaf imkom basar. When it comes to writing parchment, you write on the side that originally faced the flesh, right? Each piece of skin has two sides to it. One side is the side of the hair, and one side is the side of the flesh. So you write, when you're writing on klaf, you write on the side that was facing the flesh. Duchsustus b'mikom seir. When you write on duchsustus, you write on the side that originally faced the hair of the animal. Okay, but the point is the first part, which said very clearly that mezuzah is written on duchsustus and only tefillin is written on klaf. So the Gemara says lemitzvah. Once again, the halach l'mosh misinai is not telling me the limitations; it's just telling me the ideal. It's saying that klaf that tefillin is ideally written on klaf. But if you write tefillin on duchsustus, it would still be valid. Okay, vatanya. But the Brisa then continues and it says shina pasul. If you deviated, then it's invalid. Right? So that seems to be saying it's not just mitzvah, it's not just ideal, but it's telling me the parameters. The Gemara says mezuzah. It's going on the second part. It's going on mezuzah. That mezuzah only on duchsustus, but mezuzah cannot be written on klaf. But if you write tefillin on duchsustus, it would be okay. Okay? Vatanya, the Gemara says further, the Brisa says further, Shina bazeh uvazeh apostle. If you deviated in this or in that, implying that there's two deviations which would be invalid. You tried just answering, it's only going on mezuzah. But now it's saying Shina bazeh uvazeh, implying that if you deviate in this one or in that one, it's invalid, which would imply that if you deviate by the tefillin, meaning it implies if you write tefillin on dosustus would be invalid. So he says, no, idi mezuzah, both are going on mezuzah. One of the deviations, if you write mezuzah on klaf, it's invalid, and the other is v'had chasivnu a klaf b'mkom seir. The other part is that if you write, when you write on the klaf and you write on the side of the hair, or inami adostustus b'mkom seir, or if you write on adostustus, but you write on the side that faces the flesh. You write on the side of the face of the flesh. Either way, it would be invalid. But it's not going, the Shina Bazeh Bazeh, saying that two invalidations mentioned in the Mishnah are not going on tefillin, and tefillin really could be written on dostostos. Okay, so we're still standing strong for Rav. Okay, now we're on 79b3. V'ivai Sema, if you prefer, you could say Shina Bazeh Bazeh Tznahi. Really, maybe that there really is a machlokas about, really the word Shina Bazeh Bazeh could be going on tefillin. But this idea of writing tefillin on dostostos is a machlokes tanaim. To Tanya, we have a brisa which seems to say that Shina Bazeh Bazeh Pasol. The brisa says if you deviated in this case or in that by tefillin or mezuzah, it's invalid. Ravi Acha Machshir Mishum Rav Achai Bar Chanina V'Amri La Mishum Rabbi Yaakov Bar Chanina. And there is a second opinion that says that tefillin could be written on dostostos. So now we're saying either we could interpret the brisa, the first brisa, to be going completely like Rav, but now we have this next brisa which seems to indicate that Rav's halacha that tefillin could be written on dostostos is actually machlokas tanaim, is actually not agreed upon by everyone. Okay, Rav Papa Amar. Okay, now another possible basis for Rav's ruling. Rav to Amar Ketana Deve Menashe. The Rav was going like the following Tana, who taught this in the Academy of Menashe. Tana Deve Menashe, Ksava al haniyar valamatlis psula. If a person wrote it on paper or on cloth, it's invalid. Ala klaf valakvil valdostostos kshera. But if it was written on parchment, on gvil or on dostostos, it's valid. Now, ksava mai doesn't say explicitly what we're referring to. What were we writing? What? Ilema mezuzah. If you want to tell me we're talking about writing a mezuzah klaf mikasvina. No one says you're allowed to write a mezuzah on klaf. It definitely has to be written on something else. El lava tefillin. Rather, we're referring to tefillin, and this brisa says that tefillin can be written on klaf, on gvil. Gvil again is klaf and dostostos together, and on dostostos. So you see very clearly that tefillin could be written on dostostos. The Gemara says, the Gemara challenges this, it says, V'litamech, tefillin agvil mikasvinan. We all know that tefillin cannot be written on gvil. So this brisa cannot be talking about mezuzah or tefillin. So the Gemara says, El kitani hibet sefer Torah. Rather, what that brisa was referring to was a sefer Torah, and therefore that brisa cannot be used as a proof for Rav's halacha. Again, Rav's halacha is what? Rav's halacha is that he wants to tell us that tefillin can be written both on klaf, which everyone agrees, and on dostostos. Okay, any so from here? I know this is a little bit hard to relate to, but okay, these are the different halachos, so let's go a little further. Elikitania hi.
Torah could be written on all three, is that what you're saying?
Yes, dostostos, gvil, and I believe we typically write on klaf, but you'll notice, and I don't know if this is, I didn't have a chance to look into like these halachos too deeply, but there is a major difference between new Sefer Torah and old Sefer Torah in terms of the thickness of the skin, and I wonder if it has to do with that. In other words, you look at the old Sefer Torah, they're written on like something very, very thick. I wonder if that's gevil. I don't know, but the more recent ones, complete ignorant observation. I have no idea. I've never looked into this, but the new ones are written on something very, very thin. I'm not sure if that's the difference around these. I don't know, but they're written on much. That's why they're so much lighter, right? The old ones are very, very, very heavy. It's not just the wood; it's the parchment itself is like very, very, very thick. The new ones are very, very thin. Someone can look into it. Let me know. Let us know. Elakitanya. Hayiva Sefer Torah. Fine, we said that. Leimim Seilei. Now we're going to try to bring a proof to Rav's halacha. Keyotze bo tefillin shabalu. Let's see if tefillin that are worn out. V'Sefer Torah shabala, or a Torah scroll that was worn out. Ein osem hem mezuzah. So, a very interesting suggestion over here, right? Let's say you have tefillin that's worn out. So, tefillin again, or you have a Sefer Torah that's worn out. So, let's say the Sefer Torah has in it a passage of Shema, a passage of Haim Shema, but it's worn out, right? So, it has like a bunch of passages which are done. What do you want to do? You want to like put away the Sefer Torah. So, one may have thought you could go ahead, cut out the passage of Shema, and cut out the passage of Haim Shema, stick it in your mezuzah. Fantastic. You could recycle your Sefer Torah. Great idea. You're not allowed to do so. Why? Based on a important halacha that you're not allowed to go down. Their Sefer Torah is much holier than a mezuzah, and there's the idea of ma'alim b'kodesh ve'em aridin. You're only allowed to go up in holiness. You're not allowed to go down in holiness, and therefore, since the Sefer Torah is more holy, you're not allowed to go down and bring it to a lower level called mezuzah. Okay, says the Gemara. But what's the inference? Taima de maridin, right? The reason is because you're not allowed to go down in holiness. Hamaridin osin. But if that wouldn't be the case, you would be able to do so. Now, implication that the only issue over here is ein maridin, is this mystical idea that you can't go down from holier to less holy, right? From holiest to less holy. But the implication is otherwise it would be fine. Dichsiva mai. Now, what was the original Torah scroll written on? Lav d'chsiva duchstustus, wasn't it written on duchstustus, which would imply, right, meaning they're saying that there's no issue, the only issue is that ein maridin, from holiness, holy to holy. You can't go from the most holy to a lower level. But otherwise, it would be okay. So now what's it written on? What's the Sefer Torah written on? On duchstustus. An implication would be you'd be able to make a mezuzah out of duchstustus. Sorry, tefillin out of duchstustus, which would be a proof to the idea of Rav, that you're allowed to write tefillin on duchstustus. And the Gemara, lo d'chsiv al klaf. There's no proof that was written on duchstustus. Maybe it was written on klaf. Ask the Gemara, mezuzah klaf mikasfinan. But the same brisa said that you would theoretically be able to go from the Sefer Torah to a mezuzah. And the Gemara says, are you able to write a mezuzah on klaf? The answer Gemara, yes. Vatanya, as it says over here, kasval klaf alanir valamatlis psula. Person wrote a mezuzah on parchment, on paper, or on cloth, pasul. Amishim and Elazar, Rameir haya kosval klaf. However, Rameir would write it on parchment, mneish mishtameres, because it's much sturdier when it's written on klaf. So you see that at least there is one opinion that says you could write tefillin on klaf. Okay, hashdas is lahachi. Once we've established this, that Rameir holds that you could write tefillin on klaf. L'Rav Nami lo tema duchstusas harika klaf. Maybe we misunderstood Rav all along. We originally thought that Rav was saying that duchstusas is like parchment, and both are able to be used for tefillin. But really, what Rav was saying is ela ema klaf harika duchstusas ma duchstusas kosmen la mezuzah af klaf kosmen la mezuzah. We misinterpreted Rav. We thought Rav was saying that you're allowed to write tefillin on duchstusas. Maybe what he was coming to tell us was that you're allowed to write klaf, you're allowed to write a mezuzah on klaf, and that's really where we land. That Rav is telling us that just like you write tefillin on klaf, you're able to write mezuzahs on klaf, and that was Rav's chiddush to tell us that mezuzahs are written on klaf, and I believe that's what we do, that it's written on that very thin piece called klaf for mezuzah as well, and that would have, and that is a new interpretation of Rav, basically telling us again, not that tefillin should be written on duchstustus, but rather the mezuzahs are written on klaf, and that's how the Gemara concludes. We will stop here. I guess we have a minute. So very briefly, he started off this piece. It's a bit of a depressing piece, but talking about our biases and talking about the fact that, right, he said that even this notion of a person, sometimes we can't even judge two people, judging one first and then the second one, right? Because if we assume guilty or innocence with the first person, we're not going to want to change our minds because we feel like connected to our own view. So how do we go through life with all these biases? It's basically impossible. So basically, he quotes the Gemara that talks about a person going through this jungle or this forest, and it's so difficult. He says, when does a person, and basically throughout each step, it's very difficult. How do they know what they're doing? If they have a candle, the candle refers to mitzvos and to Torah, which could guide them, but it's still dark. They're still groping. They're still trying to figure out where to go. And he says, when does the person actually have it clear? When the sun finally comes up, they come to the crossroad, which the Gemara interprets to mean the day of death. In other words, throughout our entire life. Enachnami. It's true. There is no, this notion of ever overcoming our biases. Anyone says, oh, I'm overcoming my biases. Like, I have no biases. I know I have absolute clarity over here. Don't believe the person. The only time we have absolute clarity is the day of death. And until that point, we do not have that clarity. Anyone who has that confidence of saying I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing is simply fooling themselves further, because we simply don't have that in life. He says, therefore, the litmus test for ourselves is that when we have challenges, any decision we come to easily, he says, basically be suspicious. Because anytime we come to any decision easily, it's just our biases at play. We have to recognize that we're always grappling life, especially with our own bias. We all have inclinations and things that we want to do, and therefore that's constantly going to be bribing us, and that's what our biases are. And basically the litmus test is always, did I come to the conclusion easily? If I did, be very suspicious. If I came to it with a struggle, if I came to it with a lot of second guessing, then we could at least hope that maybe, possibly, we came to the right decision. But again, a bit of a dark conclusion, but a very realistic one, to recognize that to overcome bias is simply impossible. That's something, to have that clarity is something that can only happen after we leave this physical body and we just have a soul. But until then, we have to grapple with it, and to embrace that grapple, to recognize that easy decisions are not usually not the right decisions, and to grapple with our own biases and with our own bribes that we give ourselves all the time. Have a great day.